Prison chef reveals what's really in the food served to inmates. He knew what was in the meat. He had known for 11 months. He served it anyway. The man who would eventually go on record about what happened inside the kitchen of a medium-security state correctional facility in the American Midwest spent 3 years working as a food service worker in the prison system before he walked out and never went back. He was not an inmate. He was a civilian employee, hired through a third-party food service contractor, given 2 days of orientation, handed a hairnet and a pair of latex gloves, and assigned to help prepare meals for approximately 1,400 inmates, 3 times a day, 7 days a week. His name does not appear in any public record connected to this account. He requested that it remain that way. What he described, in a series of recorded interviews conducted by a prison reform research organization in 2018, is a kitchen operating so far outside the boundaries of its own contract specifications that the gap between what was being served and what was being documented had become, in his words, a full-time management task. The kitchen received its food deliveries 3 times a week. The deliveries came from a regional distribution contractor operating under the same vendor umbrella as the food service company managing the facility's kitchen. The ingredients were government commodity surplus, the lowest grade of product available through federal nutrition assistance programs, legally distributable to institutional food service operations. There is nothing inherently wrong with commodity surplus food. The problem was not the grade of the product. The problem was the dates. Within his first month on the job, the kitchen worker noticed that a significant portion of incoming deliveries included items past their use-by dates. Not by days. In some cases, by weeks. In a few cases he documented personally, by months. He raised it with his direct supervisor, a kitchen manager employed by the same contractor. The kitchen manager told him that use-by dates on institutional food products were conservative estimates, not hard expiration points, and that the product was safe for use as long as it showed no visible signs of spoilage. That guidance is partially accurate for some shelf-stable products. It is not accurate for protein items, meat, poultry, processed protein products, where use-by dates carry a different regulatory weight entirely. The kitchen was using both. He began keeping his own records. Not formally, he had no legal training, no investigative background, no clear sense of what he was going to do with what he was documenting. He simply started writing down delivery dates and product dates in a small notebook he kept in his locker. Within 60 days, he had documented 14 separate deliveries containing protein items with expired use-by dates. All 14 had been used in meal preparation. All 14 had been served to inmates. The facility housed 1,400 people. On the days those protein items were served, every one of those 1,400 people ate what came out of that kitchen. They had no alternative. No ability to check labels. No knowledge of what the delivery records showed. No mechanism to formally refuse a meal without risking disciplinary notation on their institutional record. They ate what was put in front of them. The kitchen worker's notebook became, over 11 months, a detailed log of not just expired product usage but of the full operational reality of the kitchen he worked in. Staffing levels that regularly fell below the minimum required by the contract. Meals for 1,400 prepared by teams of 4 or 5 workers when the contract specified a minimum of 9. Equipment maintenance requests submitted and not acted upon for weeks, sometimes months, including refrigeration units operating above safe temperature thresholds for extended periods. Cleaning protocols that existed in the posted procedural documentation on the kitchen walls and nowhere else. A monthly inspection conducted by a facility staff member who spent, on average, less than 12 minutes in the kitchen, asked the same 3 questions each visit, and had never once, in the 11 months the kitchen worker was present, opened a walk-in refrigerator or checked a delivery log. The inspection forms always came back satisfactory. Every single month. For 11 months. In the late fall of 2017, the kitchen received a delivery of processed ground meat product, a commodity item used in the facility's regular protein rotation. The use-by date on the packaging was 6 weeks prior. The kitchen manager signed the delivery receipt. The product was moved to the walk-in refrigerator. The kitchen worker photographed the packaging with his personal phone before the product was stored, a violation of facility policy regarding personal electronics in the kitchen. He did it anyway. He had stopped caring about the policy. He had started caring about something else. 2 days later, a significant number of inmates in one housing unit reported gastrointestinal symptoms to the facility's medical staff. The medical log recorded the complaints. The kitchen log recorded nothing. When the facility's internal review process examined the incident, a process that took 11 days and produced a 4-page report, the review team did not pull the delivery records for the week in question. They did not inspect the walk-in refrigerator. They did not interview kitchen staff. The report concluded the gastrointestinal event was consistent with a seasonal illness circulating in the general population. The processed ground meat product, what remained of it, was used in meal preparation the following Thursday. The kitchen worker had the photograph on his phone. He had 11 months of notebook entries. He had the delivery receipt date and the product use by date, a 6-week gap documented in his own handwriting. He brought all of it to a single person, a paralegal at a prisoner advocacy organization 2 counties over, who had been receiving complaints from inmates at the facility for the better part of a year. She had been waiting for someone on the inside. When she looked at the photograph, she didn't say anything for a long moment. Then she asked him how many other deliveries he had documented. He told her 14. She asked him if he still had the notebook. He told her it was in his car. What she found inside that notebook would take 3 months to fully verify. And when she cross-referenced the delivery dates against the facility's medical log, the number 14 became something much larger. The medical log contained 340 entries. That was the number for a single calendar year, 1 facility, 12 months, 1,400 inmates. The paralegal had requested the log through a public records request filed the same week the kitchen worker brought her the notebook. She had expected the request to take weeks. It came back in 9 days, which surprised her. It would not surprise her for long. Gastrointestinal complaints represented 91 of the 340 entries. That number, 91 out of 340, was not, on its surface, alarming to anyone reviewing it casually. Digestive complaints are common in institutional settings. Large populations living in close proximity, shared facilities, high-stress environments, all of it creates conditions where gastrointestinal illness circulates regularly. The paralegal was not reviewing it casually. She was reviewing it against the kitchen worker's notebook. Of the 91 gastrointestinal entries in the medical log, 67 of them clustered within 48 to 72 hours of a dated delivery entry in the notebook, a delivery the kitchen worker had flagged as containing expired protein product. 67 out of 91. Not a seasonal illness pattern. Not random distribution across the calendar year. A pattern that tracked, almost precisely, with the dates something expired had been served. She spent 4 days cross-referencing before she was confident enough in the methodology to show it to anyone else. Then she brought it to a public health researcher she had worked with on a previous case, a woman affiliated with a university in the state who had published peer-reviewed work on illness clustering in institutional populations. The researcher looked at the cross-reference for 2 days. Her assessment was careful and specific. The correlation between the delivery dates and the complaint clusters was statistically significant. It did not constitute proof of causation in a clinical sense. It was, however, exactly the pattern that would prompt a formal epidemiological investigation if it appeared in any other institutional food service context: a school cafeteria, a hospital, a nursing home. In those settings, she noted, a pattern like this would have triggered a mandatory report to the state health department within days of the first cluster. No such report had been filed. Not once. Across 12 months of documented clusters, the paralegal filed a formal complaint with the State Department of Health. She attached the cross-reference, the notebook entries, the photograph of the expired packaging, and the researcher's written assessment. The Department of Health acknowledged receipt. An investigator was assigned within the standard response window. The investigator contacted the facility's administrative office to schedule an inspection. Standard procedure required the inspection to be conducted within 30 days of the complaint. The inspection was scheduled for day 28. On day 19, the food service contractor submitted a routine operational update to the facility's administration, a document filed monthly as part of the contract's reporting requirements. The update included a note that the kitchen had recently completed a comprehensive internal food safety review and had implemented several procedural enhancements in line with best practice standards for institutional food service operations. The update did not specify what the review had found. It did not specify what the procedural enhancements were. It was dated 4 days after the Department of Health complaint had been filed. The kitchen worker found out about the internal review from a coworker. He had not been interviewed as part of it. None of the kitchen staff he spoke to had been interviewed as part of it. The review, as far as anyone in the kitchen could determine, had been conducted by the contractor's regional operations manager, a person none of them had met before, who had spent approximately half a day at the facility, reviewed paperwork in the kitchen manager's office, and left before the afternoon meal service began. The walk-in refrigerators had not been inspected during that visit either. When the State Health Department investigator arrived on day 28, the kitchen was clean. Observably, documentably clean, in a way that the kitchen worker, standing at his station during the inspection, later described as inconsistent with any version of the kitchen he had worked in over the previous 11 months. New labels on storage containers. Updated temperature logs posted beside each refrigeration unit. A full cleaning protocol checklist on a clipboard near the entrance, signed off for each of the previous 14 days. The investigator moved through the kitchen methodically. She checked the refrigeration temperatures. She reviewed the posted logs. She examined the current delivery inventory. Everything she checked was in order. Because everything she could check had been prepared for her to check it. What she could not check, what no inspection conducted with advanced scheduling could effectively check, was what had been delivered, stored, and served in the weeks and months before she arrived. The delivery records for the period covered by the kitchen worker's notebook were not part of her inspection scope. She had not requested them in advance. When she asked to see them during the inspection, the kitchen manager produced records for the current month only, explaining that prior period records were archived off-site with the contractor's regional office. She noted the explanation. She did not follow up with the regional office. The inspection report was filed 12 days later. No deficiencies noted. The Department of Health closed the complaint. The paralegal received the closure letter on a Tuesday. She read it once, set it down, and called the public health researcher. The researcher had anticipated this outcome. She told the paralegal that the inspection process, as structured, was not designed to detect historical pattern violations. It was designed to assess current compliance status at a single point in time. An inspection that found everything in order, she said, was not evidence that everything had been in order. It was evidence that everything was in order on the day of the inspection. Those were two entirely different findings. The system treated them as the same. The paralegal filed a second complaint. This one went to the state's Department of Corrections Oversight Office rather than the Health Department, a separate agency with a separate investigative mandate and access to a broader range of facility records. She included everything from the first complaint and added the timeline of the contractor's internal review, the date it was conducted relative to the Health Department complaint, and a formal request that the investigating body obtain the delivery records from the contractor's regional archive. The Oversight Office acknowledged receipt. A senior investigator was assigned. His first action was to formally request the delivery records from the contractor. The contractor responded within the required timeframe. They provided records covering the most recent 90 days of operation. The kitchen worker's notebook covered a period beginning 11 months prior. The investigator requested the full period. The contractor responded that records beyond 90 days were maintained in a proprietary internal archive system and that producing them would require a formal legal process beyond the scope of the administrative complaint. The investigator noted the response. He requested guidance from the Oversight Office's legal division on how to proceed. That guidance request was submitted on a Friday. The following Monday, the investigator's caseload was reviewed as part of a routine quarterly staffing assessment. He was assigned 4 new cases. The kitchen complaint moved from active to pending review status. It stayed there for 63 days. The kitchen worker had stopped working at the facility by this point. He had given his notice 3 weeks after bringing the notebook to the paralegal, Not because anyone had pressured him to leave, but because he had reached a point where he could not continue serving meals he did not believe were safe and had no confidence that anything he had documented was going to change. He left on a Friday. On the following Monday, the kitchen manager submitted a report to the contractor's HR division noting that the departed employee had violated facility policy by possessing a personal electronic device in the kitchen. The report was filed 63 days after the employee had left. It was filed the same week the Oversight Office complaint moved to pending review status. The timing was noted later. By then, something else had happened that made the HR report the least significant document in the file. A second kitchen worker had come forward. She had worked at a different facility. Same contractor. Different state. And what she had documented was not 11 months of expired deliveries. It was 3 years. 2 workers. 2 facilities. 2 states. The same contractor. The second kitchen worker's name was never made public. She had worked at a medium-security correctional facility in a neighboring state for 3 years and 4 months, longer than any other civilian food service employee at that facility during the same period. People cycled through the kitchen constantly. The work was hard, the pay was low, and the conditions made retention difficult. She had stayed because she needed the income and because, for the first 2 years, she had told herself that what she was seeing was normal. By the 3rd year, she no longer believed that. She had kept records the way the first kitchen worker had, informally, personally, without any clear plan for what to do with them. But where his documentation was primarily a notebook of dates and delivery observations, hers was more extensive. She had saved photographs. Delivery manifests she had personally handled and quietly copied before filing. Internal kitchen memos. A handwritten log of staffing levels for each meal service over a 14-month period. And one item that neither she nor the paralegal had anticipated finding, a printed copy of the contractor's internal cost per meal target document, a 1-page operational guideline distributed to kitchen managers at the beginning of each contract year specifying the maximum allowable cost per meal served. The target for the facility where she worked was $1.19 per meal. The paralegal looked at that number for a long time. Then she requested the food service contract for the second facility through a public records filing. The contract specified a per meal cost allocation of $2.43. The difference between $2.43 and $1.19 was $1.24 per meal. Across 3 meals a day, served to a facility population of approximately 900 inmates, that gap represented $1,116 per day. Over a standard contract year, it represented more than $407,000 at a single facility. The contractor operated food service contracts at 23 facilities across 4 states. The paralegal brought both workers' documentation, both sets of facility records, and the cost per meal analysis to the same public health researcher who had assessed the medical log cross-reference. The researcher reviewed everything over 5 days. Her written assessment this time was less cautious than the first one. She described the cost per meal target document as the most significant item in the file, not because it proved any specific instance of harm, but because it demonstrated that the conditions both workers had described were not the result of individual kitchen mismanagement or localized negligence. They were the result of a financial target. Someone had calculated exactly how much could be removed from the per meal cost while maintaining the appearance of contract compliance. The expired product, the understaffing, the deferred maintenance, the abbreviated inspections, none of it was accidental. All of it was the operational consequence of a margin being deliberately engineered into the contract from the inside. The food was not bad because the system was broken. The food was bad because the margin required it to be. The paralegal contacted a federal oversight body directly. Not a state agency. Not a department with jurisdiction over a single facility or a single contract. She contacted the office responsible for auditing federal funds distributed to state correctional systems, a body with subpoena authority over contractor financial records that no state-level complaint process had been able to access. She submitted a formal complaint with the complete documentation package, both workers' records, the medical log cross-reference, the cost per meal analysis, the contract versus target gap calculation, and a summary of the 2 failed state-level complaint processes, including the inspection that found no deficiencies 8 days after the kitchen had been prepared for it, and the oversight investigation that had sat in pending status for 63 days before going nowhere. The federal office acknowledged receipt. It assigned an audit team. The audit took 7 months. During those 7 months, the contractor continued operating all 23 of its correctional food service contracts. During those 7 months, both kitchen workers were contacted by the contractor's legal representatives. Both were informed, in writing, that the contractor was aware they had provided information to oversight authorities, that the contractor reserved the right to pursue legal remedies for any breach of confidentiality provisions in their employment agreements, and that the contractor's position was that all facilities under its management operated in full compliance with applicable standards. Both workers forwarded the letters to the paralegal. She forwarded them to the federal audit team. The audit team noted them as potential witness interference and logged them accordingly. The audit report was released in a redacted public version 14 months after the complaint was filed. It was 218 pages long. The findings were extensive and, in places, damaging in ways that went beyond what either the paralegal or the research documents had established. The audit confirmed that the contractor had maintained dual-cost documentation across multiple facilities, an external cost structure presented to state contracting agencies showing per-meal expenditures consistent with contract specifications, and an internal cost target system showing the actual per-meal expenditure the contractor was engineering toward. The gap between the two was not uniform across all 23 facilities. It varied, larger at some facilities, smaller at others, in a pattern the auditors noted appeared to correlate with the frequency and rigor of each facility's inspection protocols. Facilities with less frequent or less thorough inspections showed larger gaps between external and internal cost figures. The contractor had, in effect, calibrated how much it could extract from each contract based on how closely that contract was being watched. The audit identified financial discrepancies totaling approximately $11.3 million across the contractor's active contracts over a 5-year audit period. It referred the findings to the Department of Justice for further review. The DOJ review took an additional 16 months. At the conclusion of that review, the contractor entered into a settlement agreement with the federal government. The settlement required the contractor to pay $6.1 million in restitution to the affected state correctional systems. It required the contractor to submit to an independent compliance monitor for a period of 3 years. It did not require the contractor to admit liability. It did not terminate the contractor's existing food service contracts. Of the 23 facilities operating under the contractor's management at the time the audit was initiated, 19 continued under the same contractor following the settlement. The cost per meal target document, the single piece of evidence that had shifted the entire investigation from a pattern of negligence to a documented financial strategy, had been produced by the second kitchen worker at personal risk, preserved over 3 years of employment, and handed to a paralegal at a nonprofit organization with no subpoena authority and no enforcement power. Without it, the federal audit would have had no documented evidence of intent. With it, the audit established that the conditions in both kitchens, the expired product, the understaffing, the maintenance failures, the inspection theater, were not symptoms of a poorly managed operation. They were the managed operation. The first kitchen worker's HR violation report, the one filed 63 days after he left, citing his use of a personal phone in the kitchen, was included in the federal audit file as a documented example of retaliatory record filing. It did not result in any action against him. It also did not result in any action against the kitchen manager who filed it. The 1,400 inmates at the first facility ate 3 meals a day for 11 months while the pattern the kitchen worker was documenting played out around them. They filed grievances through the institutional process. The grievances were reviewed by the facility administration. The facility administration was the client of the contractor providing the food. Most of the grievances were denied. The ones that were not denied were noted as resolved after a meal quality review, a review conducted internally by the same kitchen management structure that had signed off on the expired deliveries. Both kitchen workers gave recorded testimony to the federal audit team. Their accounts were included in the audit report's findings section, attributed to unnamed current and former facility food service employees. Neither of them was contacted by any state or federal agency following the settlement to discuss what came next, what changed, or whether the facilities where they had worked had improved. Neither of them knew, at the time this account was compiled, whether the food being served at those facilities today was meaningfully different from what they had served. The Contractor's Compliance Monitor filed its first annual report 18 months after the settlement. The report noted meaningful improvements in documentation practices and inspection protocols at the majority of monitored facilities. It noted that per meal cost figures across the contractor's active contracts were now within acceptable variance of contract specifications. It did not assess what the inmates at those facilities were actually eating. It assessed what the records said they were eating. Those are not the same thing. They have never been the same thing. And in a system where the records are produced by the same entity being paid to fill the trays, the distance between those two measurements is exactly where $11.3 million disappeared. It could disappear again. The structure that allowed it is still in place. The inspections are still scheduled in advance. The records are still self-reported. The margin is still being calculated. 2 workers walked out of 2 kitchens in 2 different states and handed a non-profit paralegal the evidence that a federal audit needed to function. The system did not find them. They found the system. And what they found is still being served, in 19 of the 23 facilities, 3 times a day. If this story stayed with you, the next one goes deeper.